Hi, guys. Merry Christmas to each of you and early Happy New Year. Today, I'm going to talk about medical devices, and we are going to talk about three different aspects. We're going to talk about briefly about the history of medical devices and technology. We are also going to talk about the device development process, what that looks like getting devices approved, what process they go through. And then the final thing we're going to talk about is specifically neurostimulation. And that's, what I specialize in. And so I'm very passionate about that. And so we'll focus most of our energy on neurostimulation because I think that's what could directly help so many of you. So the first thing we will talk about is the history of medical devices. So obviously, medical devices and technology have been out a long, long time for people. And so some of the earliest things that we know about is 6,000 years ago, we know that they had tools like knives that were sharpened down that they could use surgically. We also know about the development of certain, herbs that they would use if people were sick, exposure to sunshine, and those kinds of things. And then some of what we'll talk about in neurostimulation I think is really, really interesting. So neurostimulation is the use of electrical energy to have a desired outcome. And so for us in bladder stimulation, it's electrical energy applied on specific nerves opens up the connection between the brain and the bladder. But you guys will find this really interesting. Almost in 2750 BC, before Christ, so almost 5,000 years ago now, basically, the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, used fish and eels to treat conditions. And so those fish, called the torpedo fish, used electrical energy. And so they figured out if they had headaches or other conditions, they would stick their feet in water, and these fish would kind of give them a little bit of a shock, and all of a sudden their headache would be gone. The Romans in 15 AD used, and it's described in their literature, the same thing, a bioelectric torpedo fish. And so again, it's another fish that uses electrical energy. And they used electrical energy to heal their various ailments, including headaches and some other conditions. And then the Greeks, 400 years before Christ, used electric eels. So it's kind of interesting. You see in these ancient cultures, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Grecians, they all use these things to treat their various conditions. The modern use of electrical energy kind of dates back to, I put a little picture on this, but it dates back to Luigi Galvani. And so he was in the 1737 to 1798 was his lifespan. But he started using electrical stimulation, and you guys have seen some of those experiments. But he had frog legs, and he electrically stimulated it. And these frog legs were dissected apart from the body. But he could he could stimulate the nerves that were along those and make the frog legs jump. And so people started to consider maybe the nervous system and the body is really an electrical system, and that was kind of the development of that thinking. In the 1950s and 60s, the pacemaker was accidentally discovered. And then it was about that time that we started using electrical energy for other conditions. So in 1967, the first neurostimulation device was used, and that was used for chronic pain. And a neurosurgeon sewed a little electrode onto the spinal cord of somebody, and with the use of electrical energy, pain signals couldn't get through that area. His name was Dr. Norman Shealy. And then there was all sorts of home electrical things that you could use for other conditions. If you were sick, if you had a headache, you could hold on to a little electrical things. But I think out of all of these things, probably the pacemaker was one of the biggest developments because it, kept people alive. And they would use this in children and adults initially it was an external huge device, and so they were laying in a bed and they had little things that were stimulating the heart, but eventually it got down to implantable technology. And then we started using it. So we've used kind of electrical energy for conditions that affect the body, and you would say really bad ways. Heart arrhythmias, obviously can lead to death. Chronic pain conditions can lead to just a miserable quality of life. But this technology also came into being for people with bladder problems. And you guys have heard me speak about this, but I think you guys know this personally. But bladder problems really reduce the quality of your life in a significant way. And that's what all the research has shown. And so the use of these devices in people started in the 1960s. So really 10 years after the development of the pacemaker for people in their heart, this started being used for bladder problems. And I mentioned the history of this a little bit, but I think it's very fascinating. It was the late 1800s that researchers started using electrical energy on some of the sacral nerves, the nerves that sit below the low back area in your sacral area. And they found that if they used just a little bit of electrical stimulation, that it would affect these dogs' bladders and open back up the communication between the brain and the bladder for dogs that had bladder problems. Then it was in 1972 that they started really kind of perfecting this technology and using it for dogs and cats. Again, animal-based research and implanting these electrodes and trying to figure out which were the correct nerves that would really stimulate those. And then it was two doctors, Dr. Tonigo and Schmidt. So they were both urologists, and they started working with people who had overactive bladder, people who were going frequently, and people who had incontinence. And so in 1982, they started doing all this lab research, but then they actually started implanting these little devices into people. And so a few years later, in 1989, they presented their kind of case series of 22 people that they had implanted these devices in, and just the fact that it would help people who had bladder spasticity, overactive bladder, and people who had incontinence. And so they published their research, and that was kind of the, jump-started what is now called sacral neuromodulation. In 1994 was the first time one of these devices was approved for use in humans by the FDA. And so I'm going to talk briefly about that FDA process. And so this is kind of the FDA development process. And so for any medical device to get FDA approved, it really has to go through 5 different stages. And so the main technology that we use is called axonics technology. But step 1 is kind of the device discovery and concept. And so as we've been talking here, you can tell that the idea for this, the thought behind it, has actually been around for decades and decades and decades, and really beyond that. And then step 2 is preclinical research, and that's where they develop a prototype, and that's what these 2 doctors actually did, in the 70s and into the 80s, and then they presented their information. And then stage 3 is a pathway to approval. The devices are tested on people, so usually you have to have a manufacturer, a company who says, okay, we believe in this idea. This is really going to help people who have this problem. So you have to have a manufacturer. They obviously have to have engineers and resources and money, and then they have to basically do studies to make sure that the device is safe, to make sure that the device does what it says it's going to do, that it doesn't have really bad side effects. And so they do all this research, and that's the step 3 pathway to approval. The step 4 is the FDA reviews that. So the FDA looks at all the data, all the information, all the research, and usually this whole process takes years and years and years. So they would look at all this, and then the FDA would approve this specific device for this specific indication. And usually that's where So we would say maybe this device was approved for urge incontinence or overactive bladder. And in fact, that's what happened with these devices. And then stage 5, so this was approved in 1994 in Europe, and then 1997 by the FDA through this process in America for urgency incontinence. And then step 5 is a post-market safety monitoring. So now the device has already come to market, it's already being used in people, and now they're going to continue to review that data and make sure that it's safe. As they do that, they start to notice certain trends and certain, you would say benefits, pros and cons probably. But one of the pros of this device is they noticed that it actually helped people who had bowel incontinence or fecal incontinence too. So not only did it help the bladder, but it also helped the bowels too. And so it was a few years later that it got FDA approved. 2011, it was approved for bowel incontinence. Obviously, technology gets better, but one of the things they noticed is this technology, and I'll show you what it looks like, but this technology can, one of the complications that they saw as it was implanted into people is one, for a lot of people it actually didn't work all that great. So it worked pretty well for about half the people, and then the other people it didn't. And for the other people, for some people, the device would actually, where it was stimulating the little nerves, would move a little bit. And if it moved, it had surgically, you had to go back in and put it to the right spot. And so that's step 5. And so the companies that make these devices then would say, okay, do we want to invest in making this technology actually better than it is? It all came, in America, it came here with a company called Medtronic. And so really they've had this technology out for, 20 plus years. But it was kind of so-so. One of the big developments that they made is they figured out on the little lead, and so remember, we have to have a little lead that applies electrical energy and then it has to hook into a battery, and that's basically how it works. But on the lead, if the lead moved just a tiny bit, you would lose the benefit of the therapy. So what they found out is they could make these little silicone, we call them tines or barbs, but they basically would cause the device to scar in place where it would stop moving. And so actually with the development of that, very, very simple development, but really had a massive effect on the quality of life for people, because once it was in the right spot, usually it just kept working. Another company came along, and I'm going to show you what their technology looks like. Let me grab it over here. And their company is named Axonics, and that's primarily the company that we use. But they came, of course, they had a portfolio of patents, and so their patents. Rebecca, I see your comment there. Thank you. Their patents, they have about 55 patents, and so basically they figure out how can we be innovative, unique, how can we do this better. And so let's say the other device that was at market maybe was helping half the people and the other half the people weren't getting a significant benefit. So I'm going to show you what this is, I'm going to show you what their technology looks like. They came out, as a company, they actually came out over 10 years ago, and so part of that was research, development, testing, refining the concept, all of those sorts of things. But I'm going to show you, there's 2 steps to the process, and it's cool because I've actually seen them build this product. They actually build it in California in their factory there. And so I'll show you, this is what the little lead looks like. It's very thin, it's stretchy, and so this is used for a trial, and you can just see how tiny it is. So that's used for a trial, and under X-ray guidance, we place 2 of these right next to the target nerves. We test to make sure we stimulate, we use electrical energy and test to make sure that it's in the right area. Then we tape it to your back, and for the next 3 to 5 days you wear it around. It has a little battery attached to it externally, and it powers those little leads. And then basically what we're looking for is significant benefit. And so we want to see a drastic reduction in your symptoms. The average person gets about a 75% reduction in their symptoms or more. So we're shooting for 75, 85, 95, 100% relief. If we can get those things, we're really, really happy. At the end of 3 to 5 days, we pull those little wires out. They go in real easy. They come out real easy. And then basically we figure out, do you love this? Do you want to do this? Do you think it's going to be life-changing for you? And so part of the development that this company, Axonics, has made, which is really cool. I've been involved with this company. I was on their medical advisory board before they came to market. And so I advised them. They were trying to figure out, they had this technology. Really smart backing for the company. They made things like cochlear implants in the past, at least the parent corporation, inhalable insulin. So they had, really smart engineers and kind of a mad scientist behind it all, coming up with these wonderful ideas. But one of the things they made is they made this little tiny battery. And so this is the battery, a model of the one that we use, but basically it is 5 cc's, which is really small volume measurement. And one of the patents they have that no one else can do is they figured out how to weld a piece of ceramic here onto titanium. And so what that does is it allows this device to be rechargeable. And so the latest version of this little device, you can use it for 6 to 9 months, and it's rechargeable. It just keeps working and working and working, and then it takes 45 minutes. You recharge your little device, and then you're good for the next 6 to 9 months. I'll show you what the lead looks like as well. So there's a lot of development that goes into this lead, and I'll show you there's 4 little contacts that are silver on the tip there. I don't know if we can see those very well. And then you can see these little spikies just above my hand here. And just above my hand, those little spikies. And so what this is 4 electrical contacts. So pretend like my finger is the nerve. This sits right next to the nerve. And then we can basically shape an electrical field perfectly for your anatomy and your physiology, which is slightly different than mine. Everyone is unique. It's like a fingerprint that each of us have. And so we can perfectly create an electrical field that matches your physiology. And then the other thing that this has is it has these little spikies. And those are the little barbs that I talked about that basically allow this little device to stay in and not move. And so this little device goes under the skin, it hooks into here, and then it lasts longer than 20 years. So it's the only device that's FDA approved that lasts over 20 years. And it's MRI compatible. So I have been to the factory where they make this. It's really interesting. They have people with, we call them bunny suits, but they're, sterile coverings, covering their kind of whole body. And it's fine electrical detail where they're creating these little transistors and creating this equipment. And then those little leads, they have them on these stretching machines, and they're stretching them all day long, thousands of times. And basically what they're doing is testing what are the limits of this device, when is it actually going to break, so that they can predict, okay, this device is really going to last for the next 40 years in that person's body without having to ever be replaced. And so it's really an amazing process to see something, I think made in America, that's made at a very high quality. It was really an honor to see that. And just interact with the people who are actually doing it. Those little cans are welded together, and they have this special, a lot of it's done with robots and computers that people oversee, but they weld on there, and they have like a little serial number and all those kinds of things. In the 4 years, a little less than 4 years that they've been out, they've already had a couple of developments that have improved their technology. MRI compatibility was one of those things. And what was cool is they actually, any of the devices that had been implanted before that actually became MRI compatible, so the FDA approved it where all of them could. The rechargeability of the device, it used to be you had to do it every month, now it's every 6 to 9 months. So there's been some, I think, really neat developments. I wrote a textbook called Sacral Neuromodulation for the Treatment of Bladder and Bowel Dysfunction. And the first chapter is all about an introduction to sacral neuromodulation and talks a little bit about this history. I think it's a fascinating history. I love, this space because it really is solving really big problems that people have. And I think a unique way that's not a pharmacology, it's not a drug that has a lot of side effects, but really this is addressing the underlying root cause. And then the side effect profile for something like this is very, very, ends up being very, very safe, with a risk really of about a 1% chance of infection for the permanent implant, which is similar to the risk for just surgery in general, but it's a very minimally invasive, simple surgery. All right, wonderful. Well, Merry Christmas to you guys, and Happy New Year coming up. I think last week I had to cancel. My wife had to have emergency surgery, so I am thankful she's at home and doing well. And actually, I had this topic picked out, history of medical devices and technology, and I think even during surgery, I was so thankful for the advancements that we've had in technology in the medical space, and just thankful that if we do have a problem, that a lot of times there's really good solutions, especially for acute problems like, you're going to die or you're going to bleed out or something like that. So I'm very grateful. She's doing well. She's back home. She's walking and moving all around. So anyways, I'm very thankful for that, and just feel like I'm very blessed. And wanted to educate you guys just a little bit about the medical device industry. One of the other ways that I kind of became, I guess, oriented with this is I've done all kinds of research over my career. I've, I think published about 60 different articles and textbook chapters and all that kind of stuff. And so some of them have been just research that I'm doing on new innovative devices like this kind of technology. And so it really opens your eyes, because you get exposure to what goes into something like this and what goes into a properly designed research study. And then the other thing I've done is I have a couple of patents myself, so I've been through the patent process where you have an innovative, unique idea, and then you're trying to come up with something that would really be, different and add value to people's lives as well. So I think for today, one of the things I'm going to do is I'll attach a PDF of the chapter that I wrote, and you guys hopefully can enjoy that and see some of the history of electrical stimulation. If you guys have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear those and interact with you guys more. God bless you all, and looking forward to a really wonderful 2024. Thank you so much.